Hello, and welcome to None of the Above. My name is Steve Nemerovski, and I'm your host. Today we're going to do the last of our interviews from the Aspen Ideas Fest, which for those of you who are regular viewers, you know every year we try and hijack people from the Ideas Fest and have them tell their interesting stories. I don't know if we've saved the best for last today, but I think we've saved the most interesting story for last today. We're going to talk to Molly Hemstreet. And, you know, our show is about solutions. It's a political program, and we examine the political system and try and understand why it's dysfunctional and polarized, and we try and offer up solutions. One of the solutions we try to study is how people get organized to solve problems. When they see a problem, how they react to it, how they get involved, how they get organized. That's part of what we're doing today. Also, since the political system is totally dysfunctional, people are spending a lot of time trying to understand how Donald Trump got elected president, and we will never answer that, and we certainly aren't going to answer it in today's interview. But today's interview relates to the part of the story where people have become fascinated with rural America, the part of America they're calling the flyover America right now. And that's where our story starts today. Hopefully through the genius of technology, we're going to post a map of North Carolina on the screen. And you're going to see a darkened area, which is the area of North Carolina where our story comes from today. And you'll notice around the darkened area, there's like a dark magenta color if that presents itself. And by the way, if there's no map on the screen, you'll just have to take my word for it. There's a magenta area, which is really where the Trump vote in North Carolina came from. Now, this is a Republican area, and in most presidential elections, they're voting, you know, 62, 63% Republican. In this election, they voted a lot closer to 70%. So this is part of the Trump phenomenon, part of the Trump era. And then last but not least, it ties into a conversation we've had about George Packer's book, The Unwinding, where the story is what happened to these parts of America. And it's not just a recent story. It's what happened over the last 30 and 40 years, how some of these factory towns, the factories shut down, how the economy eroded, and how it left major areas of our country really displaced, so to speak. Today, though, we've got not only a story about a solution, we've got a story about a great solution that's helping bring back this part of the country. And our guest is Molly Hemstreet. I'm going to do something I don't like to do very often, but I want to make sure we really get to know who Molly is. So I'm going to read her story. If I try and remember it, we'll be in trouble here. So we're going to meet Molly Hemstreet. She is the founder and general manager of Opportunity Threads, and she's the co-founder of the Industrial Commons. Opportunity Threads is the largest U.S.-based worker-owned cut and sew facility. In 2015, she co-founded the Industrial Commons, a nonprofit dedicated to teaching democratic workplace principles and worker ownership. In 2013, she co-founded the Carolina Textile District, a network of textile mills that work together to respond to demand for sustainability produced U.S. goods and builds a platform for worker participation. A lot of reading here, guys. Prior to starting Opportunity Threads in 2008, Hemstreet, I should have said Molly worked for the Center for Participatory Change, organizing economic development initiatives across rural western North Carolina to respond to the need for fair livelihoods. She also taught in the North Carolina public school system, and I know from studying Molly that she's a graduate of Duke University. So, Molly, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I don't know where to start our story. Should we start with the Great Recession, or do you want to go a little bit before that and talk about who you are and how you got into the world of problem solving? You start the story where you want to start it.
I think those are interwoven, so maybe I can just tell my story because I think my story speaks to the economics of where I'm from.
And this could be a one-question show.
It could be.
You could just answer that question for the next 27 minutes, and my viewers will love it. So
that sounds good.
Ready, set, go.
Okay, so first, to thank you so much for the opportunity to share my story and to pull out some of the complexities of what it means to be in rural America and trying to solve some of these deeply entrenched problems with solutions that we want to build communities for a long time to come. So I appreciate your entering into the complexity of what we're trying to do on the ground. So I was born in that little county people might have been able to see, Burke County, and I still live there with my wonderful family. I did have the privilege to go to Duke and leave for 4 years, and I really felt drawn to come back. When I came back, it was when our community had hit.
Let me ask you, I'm going to try to not interrupt you a lot, but of the people such as yourself who do leave and they go to Duke or where they're going to school, is it likely for them to come back,
No.
or are you an exception?
I would say when I came back, I was an exception, but I think more and more, as communities become more and more thriving places, I'm seeing more of people that have left wanting to come back. And so I would say at the time I was in a real minority, but as I see my community regain its footing, I think it's a place where people really want to come and raise their families and partake of the beautiful place we live as well. So I have lived through and am living through a really interesting economic arc of our community. When, I remember graduating from high school and a third of the people dropped out of high school. A third of people went to work in manufacturing and a third of the people went to work to some type of higher secondary or four-year education. So I really lived through that time when manufacturing was at its boom. There were more than 45% of our community was working in manufacturing. I think we had the highest number of manufacturing jobs in the whole United States. There was a real exodus of that work, particularly after NAFTA.
Textile, furniture.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about, when we think textiles, it's furniture, what we call the heritage manufacturing. So we think about textiles, furniture, metalworking, woodworking. I think we're now adding craft brew, a lot of those things our community have done for generations, and still have the capability to do that. So we really watched the exodus, a lot of that work, leaving our communities with 14-15% unemployment. And then now what's there is this real renaissance.
Again, because just to clarify our viewers, when you say leaving, this was overseas leaving in most cases too.
Yes. So this was really the result of NAFTA. This was really the result of cheaper jobs, cheaper labor south of the border, is quite honestly what it was. And then what we're really seeing now is a renaissance, more through what we're seeing as micro factories. And there was a really interesting article written a few weeks ago by Thomas Friedman, I think, Journey Through the Rusting and Rising of America. I don't have that title exactly right.
Rusting and Rising.
Yeah. So it was really kind of painted this picture of artisans that were in our communities that were really makers. I mean, a lot of rural America and a place particularly like Western North Carolina were makers. And that making turned into these large vertically integrated factories of 400 and 500 people. And then when those left, and I do remember, I remember being in high school, and I remember a large company, Alba Waldensian, and they actually made underwear for Victoria's Secret. And those folks went in there, 400 of them went in there on a Friday afternoon and were told they did not have work on Monday. And so it was really that quick exodus of the fabric of work, the economic fabric of work, the pride of work that was pulled out from under our community in a very short amount of time. Leaving, again, our community with this unprecedented unemployment. Now, if we fast forward 20 years, we're now seeing this renaissance of kind of micro factories, and that's where we see in the census the growth of industry and the growth of manufacturing are actually in these plants of 5 to 75 people. But there's this interesting story in the middle before we get to what we're doing right now, which I think is important to tell. So that was part of my context of work, is just seeing this exodus of work, teaching in our public schools at that time, and understanding if you're walking into a public school system and trying to teach children where their parents, there's no economic stability, there's really no way to teach that child, to give them a vision of what the future is when their parents might be in a different county every week trying to look for work. So from a teaching perspective, I was really called into asking this question, well, how do we bring work back? And how do we bring work back differently? How do we bring, if you've offshore once, you're going to offshore again. So what does a new iteration of work look like? So I want to put that kind of one context out there. And then I had another really interesting experience was watching my husband's work. And so he was brought into Morganton, North Carolina. He is of a Latino immigrant family. His family is from Chile. And right in the middle of our town, as in many small towns and across places like rural North Carolina, there's a chicken processing plant. So you have our beautiful little southern downtown with its craft brews and its, nice little street. And then 2 blocks down is a slaughterhouse, a chicken processing plant that's producing, upwards of like 80,000 chickens a day that are being processed. And there's a really interesting book about this story called The Maya of Morganton, because there was an unprecedented union campaign these were mainly 99% of them were immigrant workers, and they decided to organize. And that might not sound interesting or just kind of radical to your viewers, but you have to think about the context where we are in North Carolina. We are a right-to-work state. We are often vying for that bottom that bottom, are we 49th or 50th in the least unionized states in the United States, and Western North Carolina is the least unionized part of North Carolina. So there's no vehicle for organizing. So it was really unprecedented that these 500 workers stood up and organized their plants, and they won a union.
And give me a time frame for this.
This was what, 1995. So this was in the mid-90s when that happened.
Okay.
And then it was over really about the next 5 to 7 to 10 years where I watched, stood on the picket lines, helped them, supported them as much as I could. But then we watched just the systematic dismantling of this courageous act of unionization through the state, basically. I watched folks win NLRB case after NLRB case, which is the National Labor Relations Board, winning kind of the battle, but ultimately losing the war on creating equitable, safe places for workers to have a voice. So it was kind of in this context of, okay, we have really high unemployment, how are we going to bring work back? And also, well, how do we organize? Because we're not going to organize through unionization because we tried. You had an incredible precedent of people trying, and then through the systematic dismantling of that from the state and in the courts. So what is an alternative of where you're going to carve out a new economy that actually gives equity and dignity and voice to people? And so it was really in that context that I was re-entering my community. And that's where I became really interested in this model of worker ownership.
Okay, so give me another time frame. Where are you now?
So I'm back in my community. It's
And
like
what year are
early 2000. It's like 2008, 2009.
Right,
Yeah.
right around the time of the Great Recession.
Exactly. So
you-
the Great Recession, which I don't think. Yeah, I think just everything was so dire.
well,
Yes, it was.
You had already had a Great Recession.
Yeah, like-
You didn't need another Great Recession, right?
Sorry.
You,
We had already had it. You're
Right.
right. I think you're right. So
you'd already lived it.
yes. So I think we were trying to say, well, what are our solutions now?
Right.
And so.
Right, so you've gone to school, but you didn't study this, but you've come back.
No,
You've
that's
taught in the
right.
schools, and you've seen the impact on the kids.
That's right.
You've met your husband, and you've tried to understand the role of organizing in problem solving for people in communities like this. You've seen those puzzle pieces.
Yes.
And now at some point in your life, 2008-ish, you're trying to solve a problem here. We've got a dire economic need here. We have to bring jobs back. The union path is probably not the right path, but we do need a concept for organizing. in a
That's
certain
right.
way. Okay. So those are the kind of the puzzle pieces?
Those are my
Am I
puzzle
miss-
pieces.
All
Yeah,
right.
thank you.
Any
You're
other puzzle
good.
piece that
That's-
were, okay, those are the puzzle pieces.
Well,
You've
I
got
think
the
the
puzzle
other
pieces.
puzzle piece not to jettison is, and I think this is often what we're encouraged to do, which I think we resist in rural communities, is to jettison these 100 years of knowledge around the assets that we have. So at the same time, this was our landscape of challenge. I think we have this other landscape of our assets. And our assets is we've known how to make things for hundreds of years.
No, and I love that
So-
part of the story. And in fact, I do try to read more about rural America, and I think that's what people in rural America that want to solve problems like you, how they're solving those problems. They're trying to figure out how do we marry an ingrained base of skills, right, to worker populations, which may be immigrant worker populations, and how do we create from there, and that's what you've done. So you got all these puzzle pieces on the table.
right, and I'm starting to
All
move them
Now
together.
tell us about the puzzle. Tell us what the puzzle looked like that you built.
That's right. And that's not to say that, something like your asset might have really taken a hit. But just because your asset for something like manufacturing or the skill of textile manufacturing, where people have been doing it for generations, we have one of the best R&D facilities 20 miles from us. We have factories that have been running for over 100 years. Now, there's an economic hit, yes, but that doesn't mean we need to jettison all that infrastructure and all that knowledge out. We need to learn how to pivot it.
Right.
And so I think it was really within that concept of understanding our asset and understanding of kind of what are we going to do with it. So I think that's a really
No, and again,
important
on our
point.
show, we try and talk about solutions, and that's why I want people to understand that when you're faced with a problem and then you want to start organizing, you almost have to have a business plan, for lack of a better conversation. And in your business plan, you have to understand what you're building. So it sounds to me like you were way ahead of the game. You got that.
Yeah, all in hindsight. I think in the middle, we were struggling for how do I stay in place, create jobs, but then fundamentally do it differently. And like what were the tools that we had? And so I think it's in hindsight we've kind of been able to put all this together, but we were really trying to solve an immediate problem.
Okay.
And so what I did is working through kind of the support of the Worker Center, which had helped unionize and support a lot of these worker
Okay.
centers. I started learning about worker ownership. And there's a really fascinating person that recently died, and he really took me under his wing, Frank Adams, and he was one of the founders. I don't know if you all are familiar with the Highlander Education Center.
I am not.
If you're in the South and you're in no organizing, you know Highlander. It's like where Rosa Parks went. We all think just Rosa Parks went and sat down on a bus. Rosa Parks was trained. She had been organized. She had, had her consciousness raised out at a place like the Highlander Education Center.
Interesting. And then got on a bus.
And then you got on a bus.
Okay.
That's right. So I think
All
you
right.
missed that story of, somehow, and it's not as simple as that, but the Highlander
But we
Education
live in a
Center.
soundbite world, so getting on the bus was the more important
Yeah,
part.
but there was a lot of work and organizing.
Okay.
So Frank Adams had been one of the, the founding voices of the Highlander Education Center, which is in East Tennessee, and he really took me under his wing. He had written the book Putting Democracy to Work, and he said, Molly, if you want to learn about worker ownership, you should start a plant. So, sounded like a good idea to me. So. And then Frank Adams, who was helping me think through these concepts of worker ownership, but not just in a service industry, but in kind of a rural manufacturing industry. And I think that was the newness that we brought to this, was how do you take ownership and this idea of worker ownership, sometimes you might hear it as cooperatives, which is usually in the Bay Area or in Madison, Wisconsin, some of these places that have more of kind of a liberal, I think, consciousness to them. How do you do that in the deep South in a rural manufacturing community? That was kind of the nut I was trying to crack. And so luckily, Frank had a connection to a market, because I knew what we needed a market. So he put me in contact with Maggie's Organics, Bené Berta, she's the founder of that. And she was interested in us setting up, because she had done a successful worker-owned cooperative in Latin America, and she wanted one of those that could be done domestically. So we had this outlet. We had a market of somebody that was willing to buy our goods. And then we had this infrastructure. So we had people that knew how to sew. We had machines. We had
You did have machines.
Yeah, we had. I mean, we had. If we didn't have it like at our grasp, it was in our space.
Okay.
And then we also had one of the leading textile R&D facilities right beside us. So we started with really an available market, and really good expertise on understanding what are the market trends that were still left in textiles, and in a group of workers that was really interested.
So in our conversation, and I think you made the right transition, you went from you to we. So
That's right.
Tell me who at this point we is.
So that's a great point. I mean, so we became workers that were interested in this. So we actually went through the Worker Center to say, okay, in the Worker Center, I'm not sure if you've done anything on Worker Centers, but Worker Centers, which is the work that my husband did, and I keep pointing this way because he's sitting over there.
Our viewers can't see him.
He can't see him, but he's
Raise
sitting
your
over
hand,
there.
Francisco. Okay.
Is a place which is really
But
in
by
the
the way,
absence of...
in full disclosure, we did invite him to join
Yeah,
us
you
on
did
the,
invite
on
him
the
to
panel,
join
right?
us.
Okay.
So worker centers are often used in places where there is an absence of unionization, but the high presence of often low-wage workers. And so trying to give them space where they can come and organize, know about their rights, often do health and safety work. So that's where we got started. And we started calling meetings because that was a level of workers that had a little bit of a consciousness. They might have stood up in their workplace. They might have thought, I'm working every day. What's happening? I'm building a business. What's happening to this wealth that I'm creating? So we started there with a group of workers and just kind of started educating them. And little by little, we had more and more of a cohesive group of workers. And we started just kind of part-time and bringing in sewing machines and starting to sew and starting to understand the markets. But little by little, there was so much traction in that. Fast forward really 6 years later, where we are, we're in 10,000 square feet. We have 24 sewers. We send our goods out all across the U.S. and some internationally. So that seed really got traction and we were able to build a sustainable, small-scale, what I would call a microfactory of textile work, really understanding what the market was. So I think so much of, somebody's described the textile pie that's so big that you're going to find your slice in it. And our slice is really about sustainable, non-offshoreable products. And that's really the niche we've been able.
Non-offshoreable. Okay.
Products. Yeah. I probably need to debunk that.
New words to me.
That's right. Thank you for calling me on the jargon. So, again, we're trying to find solutions, and it's really important when people hear our story, or my story, now our story, that textiles is just a means, it's not an end. It's the means that our community has still at its grasp. The end is sustainable livelihoods that build dignity and build rooted community wealth. That's not just extracted generation after generation. How do we build an economic enclave, which is ultimately what we're trying to build, that just isn't going to be pulled out from us again? You know, how are we trying to build generational wealth, which I think has often been the problem of in a place like rural Appalachia, where it's just, you know, we find a solution that then leaves, and we find another solution that then leaves. So how are we trying to find solutions that are rooted here? So right now, you know, we're using the shell of this industry, where there's still a lot of life in it, which is the textile and the heritage craft industries.
All right, so you made another pretty big leap for me there. You made this leap from this small weed that sounded like maybe they're working after hours in their garages kind of a thing, to now we're 7 years later. But businesses and weeds just don't happen because people want it to happen. You know, you need financing, you need equipment, you need to find the building to host it in, you need to find your markets, you need to market to your markets. It takes a lot of skills. So how did you put that skill set together, and how did you train people to develop these kind of skills? Or did you import these skills?
No, I think we grew those skills.
You
and
grew
again,
them.
I can't kind of underemphasize that a lot of those skills were still in our community. We just had to kind of leverage them. So again, we started with a kind of a hybrid board of workers and people from the community that wanted to support us. So one of the real entities that's been alongside us and is still alongside us and was alongside us when I'll leap to the next piece of the story about the manufacturing network is called the Manufacturing Solutions Center, and it is just that. And so they came on and really helped us understand the market and where the markets would be growing in textiles. And part of the reason they knew where that niche and where they could kind of help us see the light at the end of the tunnel of a profitable market in a very low wage industry was because they were doing all the testing for the work that had gone overseas. And they were seeing the turnaround times and the low quality and how unhappy people were. And they foresaw a reshoring. So when I say reshoring, offshoring is when you take work overseas. Reshoring is when you bring work back. And so they knew that there was going to be a resurgence of that work. And they also knew that there was, you know, luckily there's been this filtering down almost kind of in following the local food system is people asking, where is the shirt on, you know, my back being made? Where are my clothes being made? And knowing that you can do a lot of that production still left in the United States. So I think there was more of an opportunity for entrepreneurial folks, smaller runs, small batch, customized work, a lot of more direct-to-consumer marketing potential where that wasn't going to fit into a 500-person plant where you have 5,000 minimum units that were going to be made. It's going to be a higher margin, direct-to-consumer opportunity in the market that we were trying to capture. Does that make sense?
No. Everything you've done is making sense.
Does that leap make sense?
So you read today about people in rural areas of Africa and India and other places that because of the internet and because they can have a phone and connect to the world, that's allowed them through whatever it is that they do to grow these small businesses and whatever. Has the internet and technology, did you need that to happen, or would you have succeeded without it?
We certainly what we needed to happen was for our clients to be really, really savvy with that because they are the marketers. You have to think of us, we are still contract laborers, which is a whole another problematic conversation to have, but it's still extractive, but what we are is we contract. So everything that we're sewing that's going out the door, we're sewing someone else's need. They have to find us. Yes, they have to find us. But it's still kind of this old school, the best way to be found is by doing good work.
Gotcha.
And you know, somebody's going to go to a trade show, hey, where did you have that made? And, you know, so we haven't over really marketed ourselves. What we've tried to do is build a strong company that can do high quality, quick turn, be communicative to people, you know, and the clients that we're working with. But all of our clients, with the exception of one, are doing direct to consumer marketing. We're not selling through bricks and mortar anymore. We're doing this direct-to-consumer marketing, which actually gives them a higher margin, gives us a higher margin, and makes us, you know, be able to still be competitive in an industry like textiles. All
right, so time always flies for me when I'm on my show, and believe it or not, we're getting to the end here. I got a couple minutes left, and I do one question because I have to ask this. If you found your puzzle pieces, you put this puzzle together, it seems like it's just working. What are your headwinds? What is it will keep you from getting to the next step, or what is the next step?
Well, I want to interject one really important piece of this, because I think it's one thing for us to make a small cut and sew plant, but that was not where we wanted to stop. So I think the actually more innovative thing that we've done, and it came through a story of a woman that helped us in the beginning get started. She was another small cut and sew plant that, like, in her heyday had like 60 or 70 sewers, and I went to her and she actually invited me in, and she said, you know, look around, any machine you need, you tell me. You need any help with anything, you tell me, because if we're not in this together, then what's the point? And that really opened my eyes to the ability of people that normally would be fighting with each other or competing with each other to collaborate with each other. So I think what the leap we made from being one small plant to building out a flexible manufacturing network, think of it as a guild, think of it as a federation, takes our small plant of 24 people, and now through what we've called the Carolina Textile District is we've organized our supply chain, all those small little producers that are out there that are 5 to 50 people. We're federated. We're in an organization together that pays dues in, has votes members in, has shared values. So instead of now just being a plant of 24 people, we are an organization of 400 people. There's a lot more pull to that. So how do we replace that plant of 400 people that shut down, you know, on a Friday and told people they weren't there on a Monday? What we've been able to do is build this really economic enclave of these autonomous yet strategically linked businesses. And that, for me, is both the impact and the scale of what we're trying to do. And that's what I think is also replicable for other areas. So if one of us shuts down, we don't take the entire industry down with us. If one of us is successful, we lift everyone up. And that is what's so important. And it's what we layered on top of that was teaching democratic principles and teaching this transition to worker ownership, so that wealth is really rooted in our community. So I don't want to leave that piece of the story out, because I think that's actually the most important piece.
Well, then we saved the best for last. I saved the best interview for last and the best part of the last interview. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. So we've been talking to Molly Hemstreet, and she's got a great story to tell. So when you're hearing about rural America, I'm not sure our one Molly Hemstreet story is rural America, but I want you to hear that there are some success stories, and there's some amazing things going on around our country. We don't have time on our show to bring them in and talk about them, but it's important to know they're there, but it's also important to know that people came together to solve problems. And when we talk about political dysfunction, that's what I always talk about. People have got to come together to solve problems. And we talk about getting involved. And I think you see the results of Molly having a vision and a lot of people getting involved to make this vision work. So thanks for being with us today. We always hope you have fun on our show. We always hope you get educated on our show. And we always want to leave you with the thought that if you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. Thank you.